Wernher Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun was born on March 23, 1912 in Wörsitz, then a district town of Prussian West Pomerania. His aristocratic family, rooted in centuries of administrative service, cultivated music, languages, and the sciences, and the boy excelled at each. Yet the pivotal moment came when he discovered Hermann Oberth's treatise Die Rakete zu den Planetenrahmen. Overnight, the adolescent who had delighted in detonating fireworks beneath toy wagons resolved that his life's purpose was to lift human beings beyond Earth's gravity. That singular aim, at once romantic and relentlessly technical, would define every triumph and every moral compromise of his extraordinary career. After studies in Berlin and Zurich that blended applied physics, aerodynamics, and mechanical engineering, von Braun joined the Army Ordnance Laboratory at Kummersdorf in 1932. There he and a handful of fellow idealists tested alcohol liquid oxygen motors under the watchful eye of Captain Walter Dornberger. Their success attracted the nascent Nazi regime, whose hunger for Wunderwaffen matched von Braun's appetite for large budgets. In 1936, the team moved to the windswept Baltic island of Usedom, where the Peenemünde Army Research Center rose like a modernist city of concrete bunkers and static test stands. By October 1942, the A-4 rocket, later christened the Virgil Tungswaff II, had streaked 80 kilometers skyward, proving that a ballistic missile could climb through the stratosphere and return its supersonic speed with a 1-ton warhead. For von Braun, it was the preliminary step toward the moon. For Adolf Hitler, it was a last hope of terror-induced victory. Peenemunde's engineers were rewarded with SS ranks for streamlined logistics, and von Braun accepted the insignia of Sturmbannführer. When Allied bombers leveled the coast in 1943, production shifted to the subterranean Mittelwerk complex, where tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners assembled V-2s under appalling conditions. More people died building the rockets than were killed by their impacts on London, Antwerp, and Liège. Von Braun later claimed his allegiance was scientific, not ideological, yet he continued to visit the site, inspect the lines, and petition Berlin for additional inmates. The disjunction between his cosmic vision and the brutal means that sustained it is the unresolved axis of his biography. As the Third Reich collapsed, von Braun orchestrated a calculated escape, guiding his core staff in crates of blueprints through Bavaria into American lines. He gambled, correctly, that only the United States possessed the industrial breadth and political will to advance rocketry from weapon to spacecraft. Under Operation Paperclip, he was resettled first at Fort Bliss in White Sands, where V-2 remnants became flying laboratories, and then in Huntsville, Alabama, where Redstone Arsenal evolved into the hub of U.S. missile development. The Redstone missile and its Jupiter derivative carried Army warheads, but the stretched Jupiter C booster also lofted Explorer 1 in January 1958, belatedly placing a U.S. satellite into orbit and revealing the Van Allen radiation belts. In the eyes of the American public, the German Baron had become a Cold War champion. When NASA absorbed Huntsville's propulsion projects in 1960, von Braun became the first director of the Marshall Space Flight Center, commanded a workforce of 20,000, and embarked on the Saturn program. His engineering philosophy, exhaustive static testing, generous mass margins and hierarchies that funneled every drawing through a centralized engineering review, produced the Saturn V, whose 5F1 engines in the first stage remain unrivaled in thrust. On July 16, 1969, that 110-meter tower thundered off Pad 39, hurling Apollo 11 toward Mare Tranquillitatis, without von Braun's insistence on raw performance. The lunar architecture conceived in Washington might never have escaped low Earth orbit. Equally potent was his public charisma. In mid-1950s, he had teamed with Walt Disney to film primetime television specials that explained orbit mechanics with chalkboard elegance and pastel concept art, seeding a generation's imagination with space stations, nuclear ferries, and Martian expeditions. Yet after Apollo 17, the political tide ebbed. Von Braun proposed a phased roadmap, reusable shuttles, a permanently crewed orbital workshop, and a manned Mars landing before 1985. But Congress and the Nixon administration, fatigued by Vietnam and budget deficits, slashed post-Apollo ambitions. Frustrated, he resigned from NASA in 1972 to join Fairchild Industries, where he championed space-based solar power satellites and privately funded launchers. But his influence waned as cancer advanced. He died in Alexandria, Virginia, on June 16, 1977. Just months before the first space shuttle began engine tests he had once envisioned as mere stepping stones to deeper space. Technically, his legacy is monumental. The A-4 pioneered high-thrust liquid propulsion, turbo-pump-fed engines, and Euro-stabilized guidance. The Redstone and Jupiter set the template for all medium-range ballistic missiles. The Saturn V remains the archetype of heavy-lift boosters, unmatched in payload for half a century. Administratively, he demonstrated that systems engineering could orchestrate hundreds of subcontractors and tens of thousands of specialists toward a single transcendent goal. Morally, the record is darker. He leveraged slave labor, donned the uniform of the SS, and served a genocidal state for the chance to pursue his personal dream. Defenders argue that without him, humanity's path to the moon would have been delayed by decades. Detractors answer that science divorced from ethical accountability courts catastrophe. Universities still teach von Braun's equations of mass fraction and specific impulse. Even his courses in ethics cite him as a case study in the perils of value-neutral expertise. Perhaps the fairest judgment acknowledges both dimensions. The visionary who translated Jules Verne into turbopumps and fenced launch towers, and the opportunist who traded moral innocence for unlimited funding. Out of that uneasy alloy emerged the machines that carried humans to the lunar surface and continue to send probes beyond the heliopause. Wernher von Braun thus embodies the fundamental ambiguity of technological modernity, the power of scientific genius to achieve the sublime and the terrible in the very same stroke.